I am just going to bring in my colleague Tom Connell, who is still with us. Tom, obviously, you know the streets of Melbourne really well. Just explain for us where exactly the protests are, where it looks like they're heading, what's happening in terms of the layout there in the CBD. Obviously, no social distancing going on at the moment. Some people wearing masks, a lot of them aren't, but the anger is palpable. You can see from those scenes people just screaming abuse at police officers and also directing a lot of that at the media as well.
So the protesters have moved back away from Parliament. This was interesting because we saw on Sunday very ugly scenes when they were corralled to Richmond in the inner east of Melbourne, and a huge group was corralled with only about 30 or so officers. They charged through. They got through that line of police officers. We saw officers seriously assaulted. Some of them were fearing for their lives at that point. This time at Victorian Parliament, the vision we had earlier, there were 3 or 4 lines of police. There were riot squad with shields, there were police, and they obviously realised, these protesters, they weren't going to be able to charge through. They seemed quite prepared the other day to be able to charge through. They had ski masks on. They were able to, prevent the capsicum spray getting in their eyes and got through that. You can see there they've walked back down Bourke Street, so we're looking up Bourke Street towards Spring Street at the moment. They've obviously milled for a few minutes there, realised the police presence meant they were not going to be able to make their way through, and they've gone back down Bourke Street. Now, they've come originally from the Victorian markets, up along Latrobe and Victoria Streets towards State Parliament. Now they're going back. So this will be interesting. Will they disperse a bit? It seems as though they've given up on trying to make any sort of impact there on the State Parliament. You could see the buses milling around State Parliament as well. They went from the CFMEU offices near the Queen Victoria Market, and a huge presence bussed in quickly, skirting around the protesters and getting there ahead of time to be able to block off State Parliament, with a news conference happening at the time, of course, with Tim Pallas, who was being asked, what do you think about the protests happening right outside? So they've headed back down Bourke Street. The hope for police, obviously, will be they disperse somewhat as a result of no longer having that sort of focal point to mill around. And already they seem a little bit more spread out here. So that's the geographical layout of what's just happened. Again, this is looking up Bourke Street towards Parliament there, towards where Spring Street is. And that will be the hope from police, that they might have given up on the State Parliament element, but they'll be no doubt monitoring them. I know yesterday we saw a lot of pictures of empty beer cans and so on, Ash, and that's the other concern, that part of it was an alcohol-fuelled violence yesterday that they won't want to be repeated.
Yeah, we're seeing several flares being lit as those protesters walk through there as well. You can see those on screen as we continue this live coverage of the protests happening throughout the CBD of Melbourne, with protests originally targeting the CFMEU over this construction mandatory vaccination policy, and now we've seen, as a result, the 2-week ban on the construction sector. Tom mentioned that we have heard from Victorian authorities about this morning. We heard from the Treasurer, Tim Pallas. The Premier, Daniel Andrews, wasn't at that news conference this morning, but Tim Pallas was talking about the protests at that daily news conference, and he called the scenes you're seeing on your screen reprehensible.